Hey guys, it's Charlene. Thanks for joining me here on the ScrapbookPal YouTube channel. Today we're going to make this adorable holiday card using some of the new products from Sizzix. So we're going to start out here with the vintage Sled dies. This is a really cute set. You can see I've got everything picked out, all the colors are picked out that I want to cut my pieces out from. And then I've separated them all out so I can easily grab them and put this piece together. So I'm going to start out with the wood boards that go on the top of the sled. And this is a great trick I like to do in order to get a really nice wood grain. I like to cut out the pieces in white cardstock and then use two different tones of brown Copic marker. So here you can see I have E57 for my lighter shade and E59 for the darker shade. I'm using the E59 right now, and I'm just going in with my marker and I'm running it along all of the areas that are embossed on these wood pieces. So that's where that wood grain would be. Once I have all of those spots colored in, then I can come in with the E57, which is a lighter tone, and color over the entire thing. Now, because Copics are alcohol markers and blend really well, what's going to happen is any of those harsh edges along the lines where I put the E59, that's all going to blend in with the E57. So we'll get a really nice smooth finish, but it's going to be darker in the areas where that embossing is. So it'll look like actual wood grain. Really pretty. To add a little bit of depth and dimension, I'm going to go around the edges here with some Walnut Stain Distress ink. I'm just using my blending brush and I'm rubbing it along the edges. That's going to darken those edges up. And once I've gone all the way around on all the edges of the pieces, then I'm coming in here and I'm bringing some of that walnut stain up and onto the piece from the bottom and the top. Now I've got all my wood planks done, so I can go ahead and put everything together. I'm just using some liquid glue and my reverse tweezers to do this. The tweezers will help you hold your piece and get it in position so much more easily because they hold on to the piece as you're moving it around. I like to use liquid glue to put together these kind of die sets because I have a little bit of wiggle time in order to make sure the pieces are in the correct spots. So I definitely recommend using liquid glue for these types of sets. So it's really easy to figure out which piece goes where because they only fit in one spot. If you wanted these pieces to have a little bit more dimension, you could die cut out a second set of them and glue them together so that way they were a little bit thicker on top of that main sled piece. I think that would look really pretty as well, but certainly that's a personal preference. And then there is one small blue piece that actually goes along the top of that middle rail. I actually decided not to use it, but there you can see the finished piece all put together. Now we can work on our greenery that comes along with these dies. There is kind of a holly style of leaf, a singular one as well as a double one. And you can see I'm coming in here with some rustic wilderness and just darkening up the edges on all of those leaves. And then there are two other pieces of foliage. There is kind of a leafy green piece and then kind of a pine style green piece. So I've cut those out each in a different color, and I'm using a different color of ink to go around the edges on all of them. The holly was the rustic wilderness. The leafy piece is forest moss, and then the pine needle type piece is pine needles distress ink. You could cut out as many of these as you want depending on the look you're going for. I decided that I didn't need more than this in order to create kind of a little cluster of greenery on the top of the sled. The little acorn piece does come as 2 pieces, so I recommend when you're gluing that to go ahead and tap off any excess glue you have, so that way it doesn't seep through into the little detailed parts of the acorn. You also could cut that in 2 different shades of brown with a lighter brown for the bottom main piece, so that way you get a little bit more color diversity in your acorn. So here I'm putting together the bow. It's a little hard to see on camera, but there are several small little pieces that go on this bow in order to make it look like it actually has dimension and is a tied up bow. In the light, you can kind of see it later on in the video, but just here on camera, it's a little difficult to see. But all of those pieces just fit on top of each other in various little spots on that main bow piece. You certainly could skip that if you didn't want to spend the time putting together all of those tiny little pieces on top of the bow, but I like that kind of detail stuff. I think it really can take a card up to the next level. Probably the most complicated part of putting this sled together are these little silver pieces that I've cut out that are meant to be the rivets that hold the sled together. Now what's tough is I feel like this gorgeous little accent of the silver is really nice and ties everything together, but it is hard to, 1, keep track of, and 2, get these tiny little pieces onto your put together die cut. I would say to go ahead, if you struggle with keeping track of die cut pieces, to just cut out 2 sets of these. And you can do it out of any kind of paper, but I did it out of some silver foiled paper to get a little bit of shine onto the sled. I think it looks really nice. And then I would definitely recommend using a jewel picker to apply them onto the sled. So I mentioned you could cut out 2 sets of them. The die that cuts these out is a small die, but it cuts out like 9 or 12 of them or something like that all at the same time. So that you don't have to worry about losing pieces. If you cut out 2 sets of them, then you might just have a bunch of little extra dots, which is fine. You could actually use those to decorate on your card for little bits of sparkliness if you wanted to, or you don't have to feel so bad about wasting them because it's just a tiny little scrap of paper that you would use to cut those out. So once I have all of those tiny little pieces on there, now you can see that kind of just really ties this all together. So while it's a little fussy, I think it's worthwhile to do it because it looks so nice when it's all finished. I felt like my holly leaves needed a little bit more definition, so I came in here with some G28 Copic marker and I just drew a line down the center, and then I flicked out from the center a few more detail lines. You're really not going to see a lot of this because all of the greenery is going to be layered up on the card and glued together. But I felt like it just added a little bit more detail that was needed because the other greenery pieces have so many kind of little angles and edges, and the holly greenery doesn't have quite as many. Now to layer everything all up, you can see I'm going to start a little bit below that middle wood plank. That's because I want the wood to show slightly above all of the foliage once I get it all down on here. So there's no real rhyme or reason to how I'm layering these up. I just want it to look kind of nice. If you wanted it to have some extra dimension here, you could put some thin foam squares in between some of the layers of the pieces. Because there's so many pieces in such a small space, I didn't feel like that extra dimension was needed. And also I am going to be popping the sled up on top of my card, so I didn't want to have too much dimension on here. Now here I decided to go ahead and put one of those little silver rivets that I had made. I wanted to put it in the center of the bow. I just felt like there needed to be something shiny there. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to come in with my Copic markers here, and I'm going to color all of the rivets. The first one here that I did on the bow, I'm using some B39. And then for all of the other ones, I'm going to come in with a warm gray. I'm going to use some W3. And that's just going to kind of color the tone of the silver. So it's going to be a bluish silver on top of the bow, and then everywhere else you'll have this warm gray silver, which will also help it to look a little bit more vintagey. I don't know that vintagey is actually a word, but that's what we're going to use today. We have a nice vintagey sled. All right, I'm going to hold it up here so you can get a closer look and you can see how everything really ties together now. And we have a beautiful centerpiece for our card. For my sentiment, I'm choosing a sentiment from the Festive Sentiments #1 stamps. And I'm going to heat emboss this on white onto this beautiful dark blue cardstock. Now this is actually my card base that I have here in my MISTI. It's an A2 size card base, so it's 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. And I've just stuck the entire thing there in the MISTI. I put some anti-static powder tool down, and now I'm using some clear embossing ink here, and then I can use some white embossing powder. And when you're working with colored cardstock and you are heat embossing, it does tend to hang on to the embossing powder more so than white cardstock, I've noticed. So if you have little pieces of embossing powder stuck around on your card, just use a small flathead paintbrush to wipe them away before you come in with your heat gun and melt all of your embossing powder. So the sentiment here says warm winter wishes. I think it's really pretty. I chose to put it along the bottom of the card because what I'm going to do, I'm going to come in here with this beautiful holiday knit embossing folder, and I'm going to cut this out of white cardstock, and then I'm going to trim it down so it only covers a small portion of the front of the card. So you can see I've trimmed down a piece here. It's about 2¾ inches. I essentially went along the line of what would be kind of like the knit pattern. And then I'm gluing it to the front of my card base so that there's some blue above it as well as some blue below it. So it kind of balances out there on the front of the card. Look at those little reindeer on there. Aren't they cute? So I've got my adhesive foam squares here, and I've popped up the entirety of the sled, used a couple of different sizes. And what I did is I stuck part of it down, and then I pulled it up and removed the rest of that release tape off of the foam squares. Made it a lot easier. And now I'm coming in here and I've got some white picket fence stain, and I'm going to add the look of snow here just by splattering it onto the top of my card. So you can see I just took the nozzle out, tapped off a little bit, and then went around on the entire card front. I did cover up my sentiment with a piece of scrap cardstock there just so that I didn't get the stain all over onto my sentiment and make it so that it wasn't legible. Since everything is in white, I didn't want to mess that part up. But once it dried, I can remove that, and there now you can see it looks like there is snow all over the card. As a finishing touch, I decided I wanted a little transition piece between that white embossed piece and the blue cardstock of the card base. So I cut a very, very thin strip of silver glitter paper, and I tucked it in on each side and glued it there. Now, certainly you could do that before you place the sled, and it would be a lot easier. So there is our finished card, you guys. I hope you picked up some tips and tricks today. Thank you so much for joining me here on the ScrapbookPal YouTube channel. Please be sure to like and subscribe, as well as hit that notification bell so that way you will know about future tutorials here on the channel. I hope you all have a wonderful day.